Alfred studied the airship from the ground and said, "You done a number to this girl, Hara, baby." "Yeah, that's what happens when you run into pirates." Her Opa gave her a sharp look, then turned back to the ship and asked, "Crew?" Hara shook her head. "We're a bit short-handed. I have some things I can do, so we don't need as many crew as usual, but I will need to pick up a few people as I go along." Hara motioned to Gideon and said, "He sorted it out." Alfred looked past her to Gideon, who had taken to standing behind her. "I owe you." Gideon shrugged. "I did it for my own reasons." That made Hara glance at the dragon. She kept forgetting he was a dragon and didn't have the same motivations as humans. She waved it off, because for the moment it didn't matter. She was free and alive. There were always options when you were free and alive. She had learnt that from her father. It wasn't the only thing, but it was the only thing she was proud of. Hara changed the subject and asked, "What can you do for the lady?" Alfred grunted. It would be fixed in a day or two, judging by his face. He turned and started back to the workshop and said, "Come along. I have some stew and your room is still set up for you." Hara trotted to keep up with her Opa's pace. "I've got a couple of people with me. Do you have enough space for them?" Alfred shrugged. "Your father's room is free, but it's small." Hara grinned. She remembered when they moved her father's room to the smaller room, and Alfred had given her the big room. Her father had been more than frazzled and his charm had been washed away with his confusion and anger. A large bed, which she made with Alfred, was decorated with old cogs from broken machines. That was when she knew that, despite his gruff nature, her Opa loved her. She had never been sure of her father's emotions towards her, but she didn't think love was one of them. Even though he often came to pick her up and take her on his travels, it was always for his benefit and not her own. Halfway home, Henry came trotting out from between two buildings. He grinned as he said, "It's so good to be on good old terra firma." He waved to Alfred and asked, "Is this our mechanic?" Hara motioned to Alfred and said, "This is my Opa. He's an engineer. He'll have the blazing blunderbuss up and running in no time." Henry looked Alfred over and said, "You look familiar." Alfred grinned. "Many say that." "So, boy, you part of my granddaughter's crew?" Henry beamed. "Oh yeah, better than what I had before. I might actually get to cook for a living instead of shoveling coal." Gideon said, "Good, because I hate cooking." Hara chuckled and said, "That means you'll have to take his place at the boiler." That made Gideon frown, and she smiled at the intense look on his face. It seemed her dragon wasn't up for much physical labor. She had already figured that out, but he was worth having along because he could turn into a sizable weapon at a moment's notice, and that was worth more than any amount of coal shoveling. It was a pity she would be taking him home soon. Henry was in her father's room. Gideon had spoken to Alfred and apparently that had been the end of the sleeping arrangement argument. Hara stopped at the doorway to her room and stared at Gideon. "Are you mad?" Gideon flicked his hair away from his face. "Many have commented that I am, but in my own opinion, I doubt they are the best judges of sanity." Hara motioned to her room. "I don't think you get it. You can't share my room." He shrugged, unperturbed by her aggressive tone. "I'll sleep on the floor. Do you have a pillow?" "I really like pillows. They can make the most awkward sleeping arrangements so much more comfortable." She huffed and turned. She knew she wouldn't be able to convince him, and she wasn't up for a loud fight. Once in the room, she threw a pillow at him, followed by a blanket which was folded on the bottom of her bed. Her Oma had made it before she had died. Gideon started making himself a nest on the floor and he hummed as he worked. Hara shook her head. She wasn't surprised others thought he was crazy. He was a dragon and he was sleeping on the floor in her bedroom. She tucked herself into her bed and dimmed the light, but sleep eluded her, and eventually she broke the silence. You better not snore. Gideon asked very seriously, is that the criteria for a man to share your room? That he doesn't snore. She buried her face in her pillow, wishing she hadn't said anything. It doesn't matter. He was chatty as he asked, is there a list? A list would be very useful. Actually, I should make a list for you as well. He made a soft, contented sound and added, a mate for me would have to be clever and brave. Definitely brave. I can't stand the simpering women at court. People think dragons want someone who is obsequious, but that only annoys most of us. Me included. Hara wasn't sure when he had gotten the idea she should be his mate, but it made her uncomfortable. Connections were dangerous. They allowed people to use them with the excuse that it was for someone they loved. Anger roiled inside of her. She tamped it down, otherwise she wouldn't get any sleep at all. There was a rustling sound and he continued talking. I would want someone willing to get into trouble for me. She groaned. That explained where he got the idea of her being his mate. Is that why you've been following me around? Because I was stupid enough to rescue you from those Roshian men? Gideon sounded very pleased when he made an assenting noise. She moved onto her elbow and looked down at him. Her eyes had adjusted to the darkness enough that she could make out his form on the floor, and he was lying on his back. She needed to set him straight before this got out of hand. Let me make something clear to you, dragon. I don't trust men. They're always trouble. They use you and then throw you away. His head turned to her and he said, then it's a good thing I'm a dragon and not a man. Hara flopped down and covered her head with her pillow. This was getting old very quickly. What was she supposed to do with a mad dragon? At least she would only have to deal with him for a short while. She would take him home and then she wouldn't have to think about him again. Gideon waited for Hara to fall asleep before he got up. He wandered through the house. Alfred sat by the fire and didn't seem to be startled by Gideon's appearance. Alfred poured a drink and offered it to him. Gideon sat down. They were quiet for a long while. Eventually, Alfred asked, are you going to add her to your collection? Gideon wasn't startled. The old man recognized him as a dragon. Most who dealt with nobility knew the signs, and Alfred was someone Gideon recognized from a long time ago. Though he doubted, the old man remembered him very well. She is in my collection. Alfred grunted. Does she know that? Gideon grinned at the old man. No, but that's part of the fun. Alfred shook his head. She's going to skin you alive when she finds out. Her old man has soured her towards men. The barnacles take him. He was his mother's favorite and she spoiled him rotten. I should never have let it happen. I made sure I did better with her. But you can't protect them from everything. Gideon blinked at the tirade. Even when he had been a tinker in the imperial court, Alfred had never been a man of words. He had left that scene when he had married a woman well below his status and he hadn't wanted her to feel snubbed. At least, that was what the rumors said. Gideon knew more. Mildred had been an amazing tinker herself, but she hated crowds. While Alfred was the darling of the court, his wife could never stay out of society. Alfred had given up his fame for his wife. I'll protect her, Gideon assured him. Alfred took a sip of his drink as he thought. Gideon waited patiently. Even as a young man, Alfred had been worth listening to. Now he was older and probably wiser, Gideon was curious. Eventually, Alfred said, I think she needs someone who can be more than a protector. She's been hiding for too long. She could have come home and I could have protected her, but she wandered around. There was something she couldn't get from me. Gideon propped his head on his hand and leant forward. Really? Tell me what her life has been like. Alfred raised an eyebrow. She's a better tinker than me.